Hello and welcome to the LNUR Line, the podcast for LEGO train fans. This is episode 8 and we're going to be talking about LEGO track geometry. We have a couple of members with us, so there's Matt, our usual podcast producer.
Hello.
There's Will. And there's me, Richard. We also have 3 guests with us. We have Bill Ward.
Good day.
We have Scott Hoffmeyer of Brick Tracks.
Hi there.
And we also have Marine, also known as Banana Bierman.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Hello, welcome back, Marine. So we'll move on to some LEGO train news first. So just a reminder that we have a Facebook group for LEGO train clubs worldwide to do a wagon swap or a membership brick swap. So we'll put the link in the description for that if you fancy joining in on behalf of your club. Also noteworthy is examplelayouts.com, which Marine happened to build, has launched. So there's lots of different layout inspiration for your LEGO railways on that website. I'll pass across to Will for some news from LEGO Ideas now.
So I'm here to bear some very terrible news. The LEGO Ideas set for the Queen Miracle train has not been picked up. The train community as a whole will be mourning this loss. And all I can say is I pray for the creator.
And over to Matt for some news on Trixbrx.
So Trixbrx has a wide sweep of news, some of which isn't actually pertinent to train fans as I read it. But the big thing really is their track launch, or their, at least a indication of when they're going to launch track. They've currently announced for their 9-volt line that they're going to launch a standard straight track in a 32 stud long length, and they're hoping to have that available by December this year, followed by R72 track in early 2021, and then later in 2021 we're supposed to have R88 and the standard 8 long straight track pack, which is a bit weird while they're going for a bit of an odd schedule. And following on, they've said from revenue from the first 4 items will then fund R56 straight track, 16 stud long straight track, and then lastly R104 and R120 wide radius curve tracks. Other news is that they're going to restock their XL speaker, which has been out of stock for a little while owing to the lack of cases, I believe, but they've now moved on to an injection moulded case, so the XL speakers have been restocked. Moving on, they've also announced that Eldril models are now available, or at least they've been updated. So this includes both the original 3D printed cases, which I think were done at the time by 4Trixbrx, and they've now moved on to injection moulded cases, and both types are available. There is a slight difference in Technic fitting, so the original ones had cross axles instead of round axles, but if you want more, please go and read the FX blog post. There's quite a lot of information there.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to our main topic, which is LEGO track geometry, and I'm going to start with Bill, if I can. We'll just have a couple of questions for each of our guests, and then we're going to open it up into a more sort of group discussion, I suppose. So what got you into the LEGO train hobby as an adult, Bill? We had a bit of a talk about this, I guess, before the podcast recording started, and I think that was quite a nice little story.
Well, when I was a kid, growing up in the late 1970s and early 1980s, my LEGO hobby was mostly about space. And so, when the Galaxy Explorer came out in 1978, I got one for Christmas, and I was 7 years old. So I was the perfect age to get into LEGO just at the time that the minifigure and all of those wonderful models of the late 70s and early 80s were being released. So I was a big fan of LEGO Space. But much later, when I was out of college and got into LEGO sculpture for the first time, because my brother-in-law sent me a link to some LEGO sculpture online, and I found that there was a local club, and the Bay Area LEGO Users Group here in the San Francisco Bay Area was doing LEGO club meetings and stuff. So I went to them and brought some of my early models to them, and discovered that the emphasis seems to be mostly on town and train here in the Bay Area, and the Lego Train Club was just getting off the ground, the Bay Area Lego Train Club. So I got heavily involved in Lego trains instead and started building houses and train models.
Great. It's a nice way to get involved and change allegiances as well, I suppose, in terms of
Well,
building.
I still have a soft spot in my heart for space. And I don't build a lot of space models nowadays. I really haven't built anything significant as an adult in the space theme. But when I go to Lego conventions, I'm always admiring the space models.
There are some excellent sort of neoclassic space builders out there at exhibitions, particularly in the UK, and I imagine in America as well. Okay, so the topic of the podcast is Lego track geometry, and we invited you on to the podcast because I remember your article called Lego track geometry years and years ago on your website brickpile.com, and I think you mentioned it was actually published on another one of your websites before that for a few years. So could you perhaps outline what Lego track geometry is for those who maybe aren't too sure what it means?
Right. Well, first of all, I know we're going to be talking about a lot of different track geometries, I think, in this show. My focus has always been on the parts that you actually get from Lego. So the R40 original 9-volt train track is what I've always been building in. So I never really got into the third-party producers of larger radius train tracks. So my page, the track geometry page, was built around basically, here are all the parts that Lego makes, and here's the curves and the straights and the switches and the crossover, and how do we make a interesting layout like a model railroader might out of those parts. And because Lego is based on a grid and everything is 16 studs for a straight track segment, for example, then you want to make sure that those track pieces line up before and after your yard, for example. And so I spent a bunch of time. This was in the early stages of my hobby, and 2003 was when I posted the first version of this page. And the parts, I found some tricks online, and I sort of put them together and did some analysis on the mathematics behind them and figured out what exactly you could and couldn't do with the stock pieces from Lego without stressing them very much. And the page went up on brickpile.com in 2006, but it was really just a copy and paste from an earlier website that no longer exists.
There are some really quite clever uses of Lego track. So to do things like a Y, and particularly the diagonal track as well. So I think we were discussing again before the podcast, 13 tracks in a straight line up with the standard Lego track geometry using a couple of curves. And you can go off the grid a bit and make your layouts a bit more interesting, assuming you have the space to do so anyway. So
the trick that I discovered is that if you have 12 straight tracks with a curve on either end, you can translate your track diagonally and still be within the grid. So basically, and when I say within the grid, I not only mean that the studs line up, but also that the spacing relative to the base plates lines up. For example, if you're just going to put out a bunch of 48 by 48 base plates, let's not get into things like mills, and you have your tracks that are 4 studs in from the edge of the base plate, which is kind of the standard placement that most builders use, then you can have, like, for example, if you do a Lego switch, and then the next track will be 16 studs spaced away from the original one, with 8 studs in between the inner edges of the rails, or the rails, the ties or sleepers. For the diagonal, if you do a right turn and a single R40 right, and then go 12 straight, and then a single R40 left, you will in fact still be within that grid system. And it is actually because of the Pythagorean theory. The 3, 4, 5 triangle is something people know pretty well, but there's also the 5, 12, 13 triangle. And this person named Jason Railton posted, probably on Lugnet, I'm not even sure, that the angle of the Lego R40 turn, the curved track, is 22.62 degrees. No, sorry, 22.5 degrees, but the angle of a 5, 12, 13 Pythagorean triangle is 22.62 degrees. And 22.62 is close enough to 22.5 that over the span of that length of track that it lines up.
It is really clever, and it did blow my mind when I saw it. Not really. I thought I was stuck having, like you at the time, I had only standard Lego corners and straights and the points, the switches left and right. And it did feel quite restraining in a way, and finding that article did provide quite a bit of inspiration. What do you remember other resources for Lego Train fans at the time online? Because that was, I guess, still quite early days for the web in those days.
Yeah, in those days, everything was on Lugnet, basically. So lugnet.com still exists as an archive of that site, but it did back in those days serve as the primary hub of the community for not just Lego trains, but really all Lego adult building. There really wasn't anything else. There had been the rec.toys.lego Usenet group, and before that alt.toys.lego. And so when Todd Lehman started the Lugnet website, it was built on the same technology as the Usenet news groups. And behind the scenes to this day, the Lugnet website is running a version of an NNTP news server. And that was the gold standard at the time for discussion forums. And so we have the Lugnet archive of all sorts of great information out there. And it's not very active anymore, but there's a lot of old content that is still very worthwhile. And that's where I learned, I think, a lot of this stuff. I don't have sources on my track geometry page, and I don't have any memory of where I got the sources for many of the tricks. The other trick I really wanted to highlight, though, is the trick of replacing two curves with a straight. If you have a right and a left curve together in your layout, you can take those out and put in a single straight, and then the spacing of the tracks will shift by 16 studs, but it will stay in that same grid. So if you want to have tracks that are spaced wider apart than 8 studs, you want to add 16 studs to that spacing and have them be 20 studs apart, you can, or not 20, 24 studs apart. You can do that by swapping out a right and a left curve for a straight curve, and then it will be spaced better. There's some good graphical examples on my blog post about that.
Yep, and we'll definitely be linking to that in the description. There are some really interesting ideas there if you haven't seen them before. What would you say is the most interesting Lego track layout you've seen? You've been a Lego fan for quite some time, so over shows and exhibitions over the years, have you seen a track layout that's really made you think, wow, they've really pushed Lego track geometry beyond what I thought was capable?
Nothing really jumps to mind. I've certainly seen a lot of clubs do a lot of Lego track creative work in their layouts, but a lot of times these kinds of tricks really go under the radar. So I don't know if you've certainly had this experience. I think most Lego builders have. When you do a public exhibition and you have been slaving away to try to get just the perfect geometry on the nose of your locomotive, or you've come up with a really clever snot technique to build a panel sideways and have it fit in flush, or whatever it is, and you're really proud of that. And you show that to the public, and nobody notices all that hard work. They just say, "Oh, look, it's a train." So I think this, to a certain degree, it's the same sort of a thing with things like this. If you do it right, it disappears. You don't notice that those tracks are at that weird angle, and it's really, you have to actually look for it if you want to see it. And I think that's why, for me, I haven't really noticed any specific clubs that I want to call out and say, this Lego Train Club does such an amazing job with their yard or something like that, because when they do it right, it disappears.
Yeah, I suppose it's secondary to the locomotives and the scenery and the rolling stock as well.
What really stands out is if they're not able to do it right, and they've got some really unnatural wiggle in their track, or they've got a really strange right angle curve going on or something like that, then that's what stands out. But if they do it right, it disappears.
Yes, that's definitely true. We've certainly had some interesting track layouts at shows. Final question for you, Bill, until we get to the sort of group discussion. And we asked this to a lot of our guests on LNUR Line. Are you a diesel or a steam locomotive fan?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not really, I'm also a space fan. I'm also a sculpture fan. I don't have an allegiance to one or the other. I found that certainly diesels are easier to build. They're more square and they line up with the geometry of Lego a little bit better. You don't have to use the elaborate wheel situation with the third-party running rods and so forth. So I find that diesel trains are where I have done more of my building. And so I haven't really done much in the way of steam mocks, except, some kind of more cartoony, less realistic steam. I haven't really gotten into the hobby of like making a Baldwin Locomotive Works, XYZ123, whatever it is, kind of steam train. I've done like an amusement park steam train, which is probably a gasoline engine steam train that has a shape sort of like a steam engine in the real life. So my Lego model doesn't have to be any more realistic than that. So I would say that I'm lazy and I'm not a very prolific train builder. So diesel is certainly with the direction I have gone in more.
Okay,
but I really
thank
admire
you.
the elaborate steam trains. Some of those steam trains are really amazing. Like Tony Sava's work is just incredible.
Oh yeah, some of them are really stunning. Thanks very much, Bill, and hopefully you can join us in a couple of minutes to continue the discussion as well.
Sure, happy to stick around.
Thanks, Bill. Next, we're going to move to Scott from Trixbrx, if that's okay.
It's fine by me. Fire away.
Great. Okay. So we'll start with the same question we asked Bill initially, which was, how did you get into the Lego train hobby?
I got into it probably. Let's see. When did we start over with 9-volt? That was probably like the Load and Haul Railroad, somewhere around 1991, something like that. Because a lot like Bill, prior to that, I was into space. So, Bill, it sounds like you're a little bit older than I am, but I grew up in the 80s. I grew up on Star Wars and, all of those, the sci-fi things. And so I really was into space growing up. But when the 9-volt trains came out, then they were a little bit more, I found them a little bit more interesting. I didn't really care. I had dabbled with some of the older gray rails where, they're separate pieces and, you go too fast and they just blow apart on your curves, and wasn't really excited about that. But the 9-volt ones were a lot more interesting. And so I got in starting with that one, and it just sort of grew from there.
Cool. That's classic space seems to be quite a recurring theme today. Are you a member of a Lego user group as well at the moment, or is there not one sort of locally to you?
There is one locally, NILTC, Northern Illinois Lego Train Club, and I hang out with them a lot, but I'm not actually a member.
Okay. Is it any particular reason? Just can't make the meetings, or
no? They
too
haven't
far away?
voted to admit me yet. Those bums.
Fair enough. So you're, am I right in thinking you're one of a couple of people behind Trixbrx, or is Trixbrx your own venture?
It's 3 of us, me, myself, and I.
So for anybody who hasn't come across your products, would you like to just explain what it is Trixbrx does and what it provides for the Lego train community?
Absolutely. So what we do is, and this kind of goes back a ways, and I know I'm not the only one here, but shortly after getting into the Lego train scene, a lot of us were lamenting that Lego did not make wider radius curves, and even some of their own models and sets that they produce look kind of ridiculous going around the smaller R40 curves. And especially when you start building these longer trains where you have 10 or 12 or even 20 pieces of rolling stock behind an engine, it really starts to struggle going into the curves. And so we had wished for years that Lego would produce wider curves. And after a while, it became very apparent that Lego had no interest in doing it. We just sort of were hoping that someone else in the community would take up the mantle. Someone needs to take up and produce wider curves for us all. And we had a number of people that have come and gone that promised they were going to do something, and either they didn't deliver or the product just didn't really work out well. And so I just decided one day, I'm like, you know what, rather than wait for somebody else to do it, I'm going to do it. So I started drawing up some tracks. We got quotes for tooling, and we started with making the R104s and the R120 curves. And those actually have done really, really well. I was pleasantly surprised that, and actually so was my wife, that I didn't just flush a whole lot of money down the toilet making that tooling, because injection molding tooling is not cheap, and it's.
I can imagine.
And if you get it wrong, it's very difficult to fix and repair. Now, and by difficult, I mean expensive. So, so right now what we do is we do produce a variety of curves. And we do now have the wider radius switches that are going into production finally, after what seemed like 2 years of working on the tooling for it. And yeah, it's pretty exciting so
they're
far.
really nice. The club has R104 and R120 Trixbrx curves on our main layout, and they're really nice to watch trains running around. I can see why it's quite a common request for larger radius curves, because they, especially if you're making more prototypical length wagons and carriages, they look so much sleeker going around a larger radius curve than the kind of clunky, quite toy-like, understandably, Lego R40 curves. And it's not just, you spoke a bit there about a custom track, but it isn't just track that Trixbrx do. So you do is it wheel bearings and wheel sets as well?
So we don't do the whole wheel sets, but we do make the axles and replacement wheels, since Lego discontinued the wheels that we've been using with that use the metal axle, and they've gone to that single piece molded wheel with its axle molded on and wobbles all over the place. We decided we did a joint effort with the Brick Train Depot guys and Brick Model Railroader, and we all went in and got a tool made to make basically replacement wheels for those the metal axles. And the reason there is a lot of people, at least over here, are replacing the wheel housings with just using a small ball bearing pressed into a Technic brick, and then the axle slides into there, and then you press the wheels onto the ends. So we don't do the whole wheel set. BTD and BMR both do, but we just make the wheels and the axles and sell them loose.
It is quite a handy part to have anyway if you're building large rakes, and it's nice for continuity as well, because if you're committed to building wagons in one way, and then Lego typically stop producing parts of a certain type and move to a new system or a new power system, can become quite messy. You recently released the North Pole Railroad model, which is really superb. That's a full model kit.
It is.
And there was some
bagging up parts for it earlier today.
Right. So there was some, I guess, discussion and certainly some initial reaction to the price of the model.
Sure.
I think because it is about $1,200, something like that, for the full model. And I think obviously people are quite used to paying $100 for a train set, but there's obviously a lot more work that goes into a product which is, I guess, going to be quite a small run for you guys, and there's a lot of work in the design, and I imagine sorting parts is quite a hard task, and time consuming as well for you. I just wondered if you wanted to have a say on the pricing of the model, because having looked at it, I think, with all the parts there and all the time and effort that's gone into it, I think it's quite a fair price, and it probably isn't aimed at every Lego train fan.
Yeah, thank you, and I do actually appreciate that, because we do get a lot of comments on it of people screaming at us that I've been simultaneously accused of being just a cheap Chinese knockoff of Lego and price gouging. So it's pretty incredible that I can be both of those things at the same time. But really, you've hit the nail on the head, is in that we don't have the economies of scale that Lego does. We are not producing 10,000 sets and distributing them to the retail stores throughout the world, or even have the following or the equipment that Lego does to produce that. And I think one of the biggest issues really is, though, that we get zero support from Lego on something like this. So all of the pieces we have to source from third-party suppliers, like going to Bricklink or Brick Owl, something like that, even eBay for some of the pieces. Lego does not. They not only do they not support projects like this, but they actively don't support it. So you're not allowed to buy from Bricks and Pieces or pick a brick and use it for the purpose of reselling them. So we have to source all of the parts from third-party places and third-party suppliers. So we are paying not only basically Lego margin, but then those people have their own margins that they're putting on product. They're not going to sell them at a loss either. So you're paying layers of margins to get the brick to go into the kits.
Yep,
and then, like you said,
of course,
sorting it out.
shipping as well.
Yeah, exactly. And shipping is there. It's not like I can buy all of the parts from one supplier. I think I have, you go through like the cart optimization on Bricklink, and I think we got it down to about 120 Bricklink orders.
Wow, that's quite a few.
Yeah, and then you're always having to buy extras as well, because you start getting into sometimes you run into disputes with some of the sellers. You're buying all new brick and they send you a bunch of used ones, or they send you they're short you or something like that, and so now you're having to rebuy parts that you've already bought. And
I suppose it's similar to I guess most AFOL's experience on Bricklink and all the usual. They said they had 100 in stock, but they've actually only got 10.
Yep.
All the usual frustrations on a much larger scale, probably.
Exactly.
And you recently, in fact, I can't remember how recently, but you now have a distributor in Europe for your tracks and components as well, don't you? That's Trixbrx.
Correct. So Hein out of Trixbrx is distributing for us as well, and we've been shipping him product. Probably because of the coronavirus and stuff, one of the boxes has gone missing. So we are trying to work with the Dutch postal system to try to locate that. So that was fun. We have sent them about, I think it was 15 boxes, and the one with all the wheels went missing. So
oh no.
So he will have wheels. There's no reason that he doesn't have them on his store, other than we're waiting for the box to get to him.
Sure. So a couple of questions left for you, Scott. The next one is one I also asked Bill, which was, what's the most interesting Lego track layout you've seen, particularly using brick tracks or any components, I suppose, but do you have a favorite layout from a Lego Train Club or something similar?
Well, I don't really necessarily have like a favorite track layout. So a lot of them tend to be, a lot of the ones at the shows tend to be very generic, and it's usually you have an outer loop, and maybe you have concentric outside loops, maybe one or two that diverge into the inside of the layout, and then usually a yard where everyone is storing their trains. The track layouts usually the track itself usually tends to be very utilitarian, and you do kind of glaze over it. Even I do. I get caught up in, I'm looking at scenery, I'm looking at trains. I don't really care about, I'm not looking at the track. The track really should blend into it should blend into the background.
Yeah, it's definitely not the not center stage and not something a lot of people look for. Definitely. Okay, so to round us off, Scott, steam locomotives or diesels?
I just hate trains. So no, steam for sure. Diesels are boring, and I no offense to any of the diesel builders. Some of them out there look really great. They're great models of real life locomotives, but they're just something very just very pedestrian of diesel locomotives. And to me, the steam ones take you back to, it's not only a different era, but there's sort of almost like a sort of a romance associated with them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, thanks, Scott. We'll move on to Marine next, and then we'll open it up for group discussion with Will and Matt, and possibly Henry if he fancies joining in, as he's just joined us. So, hello, Marine.
Hey, good evening.
Hello again. So we do have a separate interview with Marine, which will be put up on the podcast site once Matt's finished editing there. But he's also kindly agreed to join us for this discussion. So what got you into the Lego train hobby as an adult, Marine?
Well, it started also for me with in the 9-volt era. It was in the early 90s, probably with the Metroliner. And yeah, that's when I got addicted to trains.
The Metro Line is a brilliant set.
Oh yeah, I still have to get it back. I went into dark age when I was like 15 or 16. When I needed to buy candy and fuel for my moped and stuff. Until this day, I still regret that I have sold all my Lego back then, including the Metroliner for peanuts.
Oh no!
Yeah. I still feel the pain from that. But when I was like 20, I have bought a train back and some tracks. It was then the white 7.
Cool. And so you build, and your videos on YouTube and the Banana and Brioman name, you've got quite a following there, and I suppose you've got a reputation for doing quite weird and wacky things with Lego trains. You were showing us just before the recording and a GIF of a Lego train crashing through a pane of glass. So what's your the favorite layout you've built for videos?
My favorite layout that I've built for videos. I think one of the layouts that really stands out still, not geometry wise, but engineering wise, was the Lego train going through a transparent tube going underneath a pond with goldfish.
Oh yes.
Swimming. That was really a challenge to get it going and not get the water in the tube outside the pond, make it watertight. Yeah, that's one of the layouts that really stands out. But I have so many more layouts that stand out. Of course, with the new third-party tracks, we have lots of more new possibilities to create awesome layouts. So every layout is a jewel on itself.
Definitely, there are some fantastic videos on your channel. Particularly like the loop, which we discussed in the interview as well. I think that's. I guess every Lego train fan had probably had that idea at some point, but to actually get it functioning was something else.
Yeah, that was really the part. I could only if it worked completely finished. I built like half a year on it, and it was quite a technical challenge. It looks easy, but it's a structure of 2.5 meters high without any side supports. So like I said, geometry-wise, it's just a straight track, but it adds another dimension when going through a looping. And I wanted to send the full 60051 train through the looping, and the way it was in the store, not a customized roller coaster train like you see. And that is also why the radius had to be this big. Because otherwise the wheelbase, the nose would touch the tracks, and it would not happen. So it enters the looping with the speed of 32 kilometers an hour.
Wow, that is quite some speed.
Yeah, there were some serious hazards involved in the safety. No one could stand there because when you got that train on your head, it wouldn't be much fun.
Definitely not. You've recently launched a website called examplelayouts.com. Would you like to explain to our listeners what it is that website's for and what they can find on the website?
Yeah, that's correct. I have recently released this website, like you say, examplelayouts.com. And this website holds a catalog with all kinds of Lego Train and Trixbrx layouts, but not just layouts, also small sections of layouts. So you'll have a handy tool to have as reference when building a layout. For example, when you want to diverge 2 or 40 tracks to the right or to the left, and you still want to stay within the geometry. You want to still keep 8 studs in between each track, for example, for a station or for a rail yard. You can find all kinds of layout examples there. But it's even more because when you click on the layout, you will also have the ability to download the Bluebrick file, and you can customize it in the Bluebrick program to your liking. I'm sure many of us know the Bluebrick program. It's a program by Alban Nanti to create Lego train layouts in the computer.
It's been around a long time as well, hasn't it, Blue Brick?
It has
And
been,
it's nice to see it's still being updated.
yeah, I have put much efforts in the last years in getting this Trixbrx Bluebrick library. And finally, we have the Bluebricks library, the Trixbrx Bluebrick library. And as a result, we have now also this amazing website, which I hope will be a handy tool for the Lego Train community.
I certainly think it will do. One of the questions you see quite a lot on Facebook and in various Lego train communities is people who are maybe new to the hobby or they've just moved house and they're struggling for ideas on how can they fit basically as many trains as possible into a very small space. So I'm sure it'll be well used by people over the years.
Yes, I have implemented this wonderful feature where people can put in their available space for a layout in meters or in feet. So when you have like a 2x1 space on the attic, you can just put it in the website and see all the layouts that will fit in your available space.
So you use quite a lot of Trixbrx track parts in your videos. Do you have a favorite Trixbrx component that you always use and find really useful?
Well, of course, I am a big fan of the large radius curves because I create all kinds of Lego train layouts outdoors, and those are also very long. And when I will use these R40 curves, it will just be too tight. And also, when I put the camera in the train, when going over an R40 curve, you will get all dizzy from the footage.
Great. So the same question we've asked both Scott and Bill for you. What's the most interesting Lego track layout you've seen? Is it one you've done for an exhibition because you get to play with a lot of Trixbrx tracks, and we see all these quite wacky layouts in some ways. There's tracks all over the place and loops that go all over the place. So do you have a particular favorite layout you've built at the show or seen another builder present?
Well, I'm really a fan of the flower layout, which is made with 90 degrees crossings and single slip switches. And it's a layout in the shape of a flower. And that is a layout that really stands out and is always attracting a lot of attention at venues. But a while ago, I also did a train drafting experiment with Trixbrx R104 crossovers, and that was something that really stood out because, yeah, it was so crazy. People were laughing when they saw it, and it's a video on my channel. You should definitely check that out. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose finally, steam or diesel locomotives. Which do you have a preference?
Yeah, guys, what happened to electric here?
I had a feeling you might say that. We don't have a huge number of electric trains in the UK. I guess that's why. But yeah, we'll take electric. That will
Okay.
certainly make Jamie very happy because he's a big fan of electric locos.
Yay.
Thanks very much, Marine. And I think we can now open it up to our members and the other guests. And we'll start with a generic question just to anybody in the chat. So there are already quite a lot of custom track components that do all sorts of amazing things. Does anybody think there's a really obvious gap in these of a track element that would be really helpful that doesn't exist yet?
Yeah, 9-volt trains, metal tracks.
Same. More 9-volt.
More, yeah, definitely more 9-volt. I think it certainly sounds like Trixbrx are getting there with their plans, which is good news.
That's great to hear.
I would like to see something like a triple switch. A triple slip switch, just because that seems to be about the only part I can think of that would have a use that hasn't been done by someone yet.
I think, can you not build one out of existing Trixbrx components?
You can, but it's asymmetric, and that would bug me.
There you go. Maybe there's a suggestion for Marine to take back to Trixbrx.
I will definitely talk with the guys about that. Yeah. But the double slip crossover is not something you could use for that.
You could use the double slip, and I can't remember exactly what you use, but I've seen it done with blue bricks, but it's asymmetric. And it just bugs me. So there's more gaps between the track on one side than on the other, and it would just bug me.
Okay. I suggest you email me after the podcast and tell me the details so I can take a look at it and see what we can do.
Okay, I will. I'll also do some diagrams so it's someone understands what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, cool.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marine. And Henry as well there. Any more questions? Will is very quiet, which might mean he's eating dinner or has left the keyboard.
No, I just didn't have anything extra to say. I would say 9-volt wides. At the moment, it's not the track we've got a problem with; it's the power source.
Yeah, I've noticed
the availability of motors is becoming a real issue.
I thought I had seen some efforts to try and produce a source of them, but I'm guessing they didn't end up coming to anything.
Can't remember the name. I think it's a guy from Canada. Was it Michael Gale or something like that? Was developing.
It may have been Michael. Yeah.
I've still been operating the same Lego 9-volt motors that I've had for a long time. When Lego was in the process of discontinuing 9-volt trains, that was also at a time when they had this policy at Lego conventions of having the local Lego store open up late at night for a Midnight Madness shopping spree where you could get up to 50% off on sets. And they were clearancing out the Lego train sets at the time, the 9-volt My Own Train line. And so the little Lego train motors were on sale for 50% off. And some of us managed to score a few of those. So I've got probably a dozen or so of the 9-volt train motors. And some of the members of our club have worked out some maintenance procedures to take them apart and replace some of the components that wear out and lubricate them and improve the electrical connections and sort of keep them going forever. So they do have a thermistor inside which can go off if they're overcharged, and so replacing or removing that is sometimes the thing you have to do. There's a number of things you can do. Never throw one away because there are definitely ways to repair them.
Yeah, we're getting to that point on the playout, which is 9 volt. Luckily, the other half of the operation is an electrician, or at least trained to have been an electrician. I don't think he actually does that, so he knows what to do. It's just none of us have built up the courage to crack open one of the cases yet.
The one thing you can do with the 9-volt motors, and I think it was somebody who posted it to Eurobricks, is you can gut a power functions bogie and then just swap the motor and gears over, because they actually do fit in the same space. But obviously then you've got I think a few tweaks to actually get the electrics to all line up.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, is that picking up the contacts off of the track. What I'd really like to see is one of the third-party parts manufacturers manufacture a set of metal wheels that can pull the power off the track and then use that power to drive power functions equipment. So although power functions itself is now considered obsolete, so I'm not sure what you would do, but maybe use it to drive a charger to power up your powered up block or something, I don't know. But the way that they work is that the weight of the train sits on rubber tires, and then there's metal flanges that are separate from the tires that are pushing sideways with springs against the sides of the metal track. And so the electrical connection is picked up from that, and all you really need to do is just make a single bogie or a single even axle and a pair of wheels that you can put anywhere in your train set that would have metal flanges that would pick up electric connections off of the 9-volt track and use that to then power an onboard battery system, maybe keep its battery charged up or something like that.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm desperate for.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned it, because we've been working on and off on a power pickup wheel set for a little bit here. So
that looks really smart, Scott.
That single wheel axle box plate tile looks absolutely up my street as well. A number of times I've wanted one of those.
But I think it's important that you preserve the original Lego functionality of having the rubber tire on there, because then it'll be really quiet. That also improves. Well, I guess if you're not powering it through that, it's not as important. But the rubber tire on the wheels is a big part of how it works, and sometimes people have to replace those with like O-rings or something if the Lego train motor has worn out to the degree that the rubber has failed.
yeah, typically the rubber tire is more of a traction band to help you as you're driving along, since the Lego trains typically don't weigh all that much, or at least the stock 6-wide things didn't weigh that much.
You haven't seen my trains.
Yeah, one thing that we get a lot of people notice that Lego trains are really quiet. And when you compared to, so for example, an HO train set or something like that, which rattles and makes all kinds of little noises as it goes around its layout, the Lego trains are quite silent, and that's because of the rubber tires on the locomotives and the plastic wheels throughout the train set.
Okay. So again, a question to all of our guests and members. I know I've certainly been through stages with my Lego City where I can't get the layout right, and I can't make it. I can't get all of the track in that I want to fit in, and I can't get enough sidings in. So if to any Lego train fans struggling to get their layout right, what would you recommend?
I think it depends a lot on what they're trying to do. One of the things that you have to sort of always trade off is, do you want to stay in the Lego system grid or not? And for a club who's doing a group layout, especially if you're doing something like Mills, where the tracks are attached to the modules, and when they connect together, they absolutely have to be in the right spot, then it's very important to follow geometry techniques where you keep that grid going. But if you're doing a home layout or a personal layout, then you can be a bit more free, and you can do whatever you want, really, as long as you manage to get it to connect.
I think we mentioned the Bluebrick software earlier, and I think if you're struggling to move things around on your tables at home or wherever you've got your layout set up, then playing in the software and setting out the space you have and moving the track around without physically having to take it apart and put it back together all the time is also quite a good way to play with some ideas. And of course, you can use the example layouts.com website, which we mentioned a bit earlier, which has loads of ideas. I've been listening to other people answer questions, I've been scrolling through some of them, and there's quite an endless supply of ideas on there. So even if you borrow a small bit of a design that fits your corner of the city, I think there would be some great ideas and some inspiration there for people.
Totally agree.
One of the things I would say is, and to borrow it from the model railroad fraternity, is that less is more, especially when it comes to track. Because Lego trains, depending on what sort of scale and size you go for, there's obviously the issue of the longer trains require more space around curves, because there's more overhang and there's other bits and pieces. And the other thing really is what you actually want, because having lots of sidings is great, or switches and what have you, but at the same token, if you're then sacrificing, say, running space for sidings, is that actually a worthwhile trade-off?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I'm considering, I'm setting my Lego city up again, and I have a lot less space than I did last time for sidings. So I'm actually considering buying some shelving to store, because I like to have all my Lego trains out and on display and ready to use. So I'm considering some sort of shelving to get those up on the wall somewhere and in reach, but not taking up space in a siding.
I think that there's an idea a lot of clubs have that you must only display your rolling stock in the form of a yard, and that's not really the best way to do it. One of the things that I've often wanted to do, I think I will someday build a sort of a bookshelf type situation where you have, you don't even need to put track on it. You can just cut dados through the wood and slide the train wheels into that if they're spaced properly, and that way you can display your trains to anyone who might be coming by your layout without having to have them look a meter deep into the layout to see your train.
Yeah, it can be, especially if you've got a lot of running loops. Actually looking at a locomotive and the carriages behind it in detail when things are buzzing past, particularly in videos on YouTube, is quite frustrating, and trying to find who built that in a club of 30 people, and do they have a Flickr account, and can I find more detailed photos? So yeah, I guess that's sort of the less is more rule a little bit, but also static displays do have their space for Lego trains. We love to see them running around on the track, but for those that aren't running, it's nice to see them up close, as it were. Okay, another question for all of our guests and our members. What was your first Lego train set? And also a kind of bonus follow-up question. What is it worth now? Because I imagine if we've got a lot of 9-volt era sets as first sets, it might be quite pricey by now.
Well, I do have a Santa Fe Super Chief with the original limited edition number. It has been built and taken apart, and it's in a box. Not the original box. I throw those away.
I think if you want to call it the most original set, it's probably going to be the World City Freight set. So you're probably looking at early 2000s, I think that came out. Because it was the last train sets before power functions came. Well, it wasn't power functions, it was radio control before power functions. So that's probably my oldest one.
First one that I bought was the power functions yellow freight train set, which pretty much shows how short a time I've been in the hobby compared to everyone else. Oldest one I've got, something 9-volt. I think I've got the little red shunter set. That's probably the oldest I've got from 9-volt era.
The first set I actually got, I don't think it was quite complete, but it had all the train bits was actually set 171 from the 4.5-volt era, which is a lot older than I am. And I pretty much I think I might even have 2 nearly complete sets of that. The first whole set I got was the previous Harry Potter one, I don't know what the number is for that.
Well, if it counts, but the first one I had would have been the 6990 Space Monorail.
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good set. Do you still have it now?
Of course. It's in pieces, but I still have the box and everything. I should rebuild that.
Oh, wow. I've got the airport monorail somewhere. I know where the monorail itself is, but I can't find the track at the moment. But one day I will restore it to its former glory, I suppose. The first Lego train set I remember buying was also the Santa Fe Super Chief, which I bought from a toy store in Leicester, Domino's. And which I think that's closed now. But I remember paying, I think it was only about £26 or something when it came out. Unmotorized, of course, but I'm sure they're worth a lot more these days.
Just a couple of pennies more.
I was about to say, depending on, I think £26 will probably just about cover the printed window pieces now.
Probably. It's still in a box. I still have it. I don't have the original box, and I'm imagining it will still run with whatever 9-volt motor I put in it at the time. But I do wish I'd bought a lot more 9-volt motors like Bill had.
I wish I had bought a lot more as well, but at least I do have a few. I think I even have a couple still in their boxes.
When they were current.
And a lot more straight track as well.
Oh yeah, straight track. I have been hoarding 9-volt track for a couple of years now. Basically, I have a Bricklink alert that when it drops below a certain price, I will jump on it for a straight track and curves and switches. Not curves. I have lots of curves, but switches and crossovers and straight track. If it shows up on Bricklink below a certain price, I'll get an email.
It's a bloody good idea.
I think Will's just gone to set his own up now.
Well, I only buy from American sellers because I don't want to deal with international shipping. So I think we're not necessarily in competition.
Trust me, I don't go for American because every time I buy from America, I get stiffed on import taxes when it hits the UK. But to be fair, my strategy for getting 9-volt track is just to have every member of the LNUR go, "Oh, somebody's selling some track. Do you want it?"
I also bought a bunch off eBay as well. Every once in a while, somebody will list a massive lot of 9-volt track on eBay, and if you jump on those, you can sometimes get some pretty good deals.
eBay can have some good deals because nobody on eBay knows how much Lego is worth, apart from the sets.
Yeah, this won't work so much for you because your currency is called pounds, but in the US eBay, if you search for the words Lego and pounds, you can get bulk Lego really cheap sometimes because people will post it. I have 20 pounds of Lego for sale because my kid went off to college or whatever, and you can sometimes get those real cheap.
I think they do it kilos over here.
Yeah, I think we do use the kilogram. Okay, do we have any more questions for our guests? This is aimed at Will and Matt and Henry.
Well, I wanted to. I think it was what Bill said about how you don't notice layouts that do the job well. You only notice the ones that don't. I normally would agree with him, but maybe because I've not been massively bothered about track geometry. But I remember when I got into the hobby, the fact that the curves are very restricted was a bother to me. So I do tend to notice layouts that use standard Lego track in clever ways. A good example is myself and Carter and James took part in a conversation with the Victoria, the Australian group, and their layout and the way they do curves almost exclusively with straights is something that I have noticed. I do notice, and I think it's very, very impressive. The graceful sweeping curves that they have on their layout. I don't know whether they follow a grid or just have each module designed to fit the previous module, because I know they do work vaguely modularly. But I had to say, when you were saying that, I was like, yeah, I totally agree with you, except for this layout, which really does stand out for me.
Any more, Matt?
The one I would have in mind is that are we likely to see any radiuses greater than 120 take permanence? Because the de facto 2-track system seems to be R104 and R120. Are we going to see R136 as the third mainline standard?
That is a good question. I guess it's a question of space, isn't it? In even the larger Lego Train Club layouts at large exhibitions, there's only so much space, and by the time you've got a set of 4 curves in, I wonder if there's space for anything in between. But we can open that up to Marine and Bill and Scott as well.
Well, like I said earlier, for me, I pretty much only do R40 because I am still old-fashioned when it comes to powering my trains. But none of the third-party vendors really offer, to my knowledge, anything good in the 9-volt compatible range. I'm still waiting for ME models to fulfill my Kickstarter order for some 9-volt track. I gave them a couple $100 and never got anything for it. But,
I did get mine, but I only got the plastic track, not the metal 9-volt track on them.
I think I had actually ordered. I don't remember if it was straight or curves now, but I had ordered one or the other only, and I think it was straight because curves are a dime a dozen. The straight pieces are the more expensive, and so I think I was trying to get a big long stretch of straight from them, and I'm not sure why it never came, but it never did. So I haven't actually invested in any of the third-party providers. So for me, everything's R40. But I think as far as the question is, would we see a bigger radius? It does come down to what would fit on the layout. And I think I'm not sure about European clubs. In America, we still use inches because we're old-fashioned. But our tables tend to be about 30 inches wide, which is a large base plate. 48 by 48 is 15 inches. So 2 of those deep, and then we do 2 tables deep. So 4 48 by 48 base plates is the depth, or 6 32 by 32 base plates is the depth from front to back. And so when you make the curve, you can't go too big, or you'll have to have extra tables. And that's and if you have room on your tables, you still want to have buildings and streets and roads and things, and trees and whatever else. So I think that the larger the radius, the more trouble you're going to have doing that. And that's one of the reasons why our club sticks to R40, is just because we are probably more focused on building the buildings and the trees and things like that, not so much on the trains themselves.
Bill, have you heard of a company called, I think it's OK Brickworks? They do some this combination of 3D printed for the main part with model railway rails squeezed in for the 9-volt component, for 9-volt track. We've done a little bit of experiment. Matt's bought a few of them for the playout, which I still need to put on the layout properly, but we have tested it in show conditions, and it does seem to work.
Well, that's good to know. I haven't checked that out personally. Basically, because our club has a large stash of 9-volt track, and I have a large stash of 9-volt track, I don't have a strong, compelling need to switch to another provider. And the graceful curves on the corners of your layout are certainly nice, but it's just not a thing we've ever prioritized in my personal building or in our club's building. We tend to just have a modular layout where everybody brings their buildings, and then we try to run track around it, as opposed to having like hardcore train builders trying to show off their big running gear steam engines going gracefully around the broad curves. That's not how our club focuses its layouts.
I have to say the biggest issue I have, the reason I like large radius curves, whilst it is definitely more realistic and it looks nice, it's a simple fact. Those little Lego motors, they do not like pushing a dead steam engine plus pulling a rake of coaches at the same time on Lego curves. They really, really struggle.
That's a very good point.
I mean, my most powerful loco has 3 chuffing motors in it. It will pull anything, but it also eats a rechargeable battery box in about half a day of show. So it's yeah. You can build it to fit around those curves, but it's not pretty, and it's very expensive.
One of the members of our club, Bruce Chamberlain, a number of years ago, built a cab-forward locomotive, which is, basically a big boy, but facing the other way around with a cab on the front. And the articulated mechanism of the actual big boy or cab forward is to have one set of drivers attached to the chassis with the boiler. The other set of drivers moves a little bit from one side to the other, and then the leading and trailing wheels are attached to the ends But his version has 9-volt motors at the front and the back as the leading wheels, and then what should be the driver wheels are basically just trailers that float underneath the thing. And when it goes around a R40 curve, the thing is probably, I don't know, trying to imagine how big it is. I would imagine it's 50, 60 studs long. It's really big. It's just, if you were to put it diagonally with one end at the beginning of an R40 curve or the other end at the other end of the R40 curve, it would diagonally span that. And so it hangs way off the track. And the driver wheels trail behind it on the track, way off the side. It's really hilarious to see it go around a curve, and it's very, very unprototypical. But it does work, and he's got 2 more 9-volt motors in the tender, so it can pull a lot of stuff.
You must need some beefy transformers because we found with our experience with 9-volt, and it doesn't help that we have a resistor in between the controller and the track to allow kids to drive it without having full control. But we did find that our motors tend to struggle when you put too many on the track at once. They tend to just absorb each other's electricity.
Yeah, a dirty little secret is that we have hacked the transformers to provide more current. One of our club members has modified a couple of the 9-volt controllers to have them put out a higher amperage current. And we also have wire soldered to a couple of pieces of track segment that we scatter around the layout and then have speaker wire running back to the controllers. So we don't use the wires that come from Lego, and we don't use those little clips. So we are able to drive more current to the track that way.
We've started soldering wires directly to the track as well, but we also have a dirty little secret, and that is a 12-volt Gauge Master model railway controller.
Yeah, that's definitely a way to do it. I mean, people who want to do 9-volt trains often have a hard time finding the Lego controller, but it's just electrons. All you have to do is find anything that'll put out something in about the right voltage range and amperage range. And so if you know a little bit about the electrical requirements, you can make your own with anything off the shelf from a model railroader kit.
And so there are some other challenges with standard Lego geometry and track geometry. So, Bill, I think you had a couple of things you wanted to mention there.
Yeah, so everyone knows about the R40 curves being very tight, and that's certainly a challenge. But the other kind of challenge that you often face with standard Lego track is the shape of the turnouts. So a lot of people don't realize this, but actually the sharpest curve in the standard Lego set is in the turnouts, not in the regular R40 curve pieces. The standard way to build a turnout is you take the Lego right or left turnout, and then you add a single piece of R40 curve track to that, which brings the track parallel with the main line. And that's fine if that's the kind of switch you want to have. But if you want to have the kind of switch where it diverges, like if you're going to build a Y, or you want to build a yard where you have some tracks going off diagonally, then that extra little wiggle can be a real challenge. And if you have the curve going the other direction, it'll actually derail your train a lot of the time because you're making an S-curve out of it. One of the worst things you could possibly do in a model railroad layout or a real railroad layout is have an S-curve that you take at high speed, because the wheels just can't negotiate that in time. And so the real challenge that I faced when I was coming up with my webpage about Lego track geometry was figuring out ways to make those turnouts be anything other than just making another line parallel to the first one. And that's where, if you swap out the two curves, you can get rid of some of that S-curve action by putting a diagonally attached segment of straight track to replace the right and left curve that you would otherwise have to use. And that'll allow you to make, for example, a Y. Of course, if you're using 9-volt track, you have to electrically isolate at least one section of that Y, or you'll have a short circuit. But that can be a way to get some nice shapes out of regular Lego track. But there will always be a little bit of a wiggle because that darn curve on the switch piece.
Yeah, and I think regarding that little curve on the switch is where you get a lot of people that will take their X-Acto knife or the saw to the switch track and start cutting that off and changing it to either allow them to have those diverging curves or so that you can then put two switches in close conjunction with each other to do a crossover and maintain that 16 stud spacing between the tracks. Other things is you'll see that pretty much all of the third-party producers, be it Trixbrx, BrickTracks, OK Brickworks, anyone who is making switches of any radius really, will also not have that return angle on the end of the switch for that exact reason. One of the other questions that I get a lot is, well, what about different radii on turnouts? We have the R40s from Lego, and we have a couple of different people making the R104s now. But what about something else? Well, a lot of people ask for like an R56 turnout. The issue with doing an R56 turnout is, going along with what Bill was saying about adhering to the stud grid, the R56 turnout wouldn't really work. So for instance, if you needed to do a crossover where you wanted to switch over to a parallel track that's 16 studs apart, in theory you should be able to do a R56 curve at some angle and then another one in the other direction to return back parallel. And you can easily scoot over 16 studs, but the problem is at an R56 radius, you're no longer in the stud grid axially. So you may have moved over 16 studs, but you're now something off in between vertically. And so you can't return back to locking onto the stud grid there. So only certain radii will actually work in that configuration where you're trying to do that crossover. And those curves, sticking with the standard Lego or standard curves that we've all sort of agreed on, the R40s, 56s, 72s, 88s, 104s, 120s, et cetera, the only sizes that actually work on that doing a crossover are 40s, 104s, and if you were to go out even further, up to 200. Now, having said that, then, if you do have the crossover where we want to design the switches so that you can do that crossover, the terminating angle, and I think Bill had mentioned this earlier, that it's the same as the 40, where you terminate not at the 22.5 degrees, but it's actually 22.61984, something like that. And it doesn't sound like much. You're only talking about 0.01 degrees, but at that radius where you're so far now from the center of your curve, that actually translates to being off about 3/8 of a stud, which is why then that if you do want to go to either a parallel siding or if you wanted to diverge tangentially and continue that curve, you do need to have special curve pieces that are just a little bit shorter or longer than your standard, say, 104 curve track.
There are, I think there are definitely, we've noticed with the Trixbrx corners as well, you can kind of build yourself into some very weird maths, and it's difficult to get out of at times.
We have all kinds of short straight tracks to get back into the geometry.
Yes.
Also the one plates, then the two RC1 and RC2 connectors can be really helpful with that.
Yeah, we actually did find a use for one of the one stud long straight track pieces in, I think that was in,
for isolating 9-volt tracks, right?
No, actually, it was to get. I had some very weird geometry going on our Ambridge and Paxi layout, which we'll link. And I decided purposely not to use standard Lego track geometry on that, and I wanted to see how far I could stretch sort of weird but sort of prototypical track layout. And we ended up with a 5 stud gap between points. So we used the 4 stud long and a 1 stud long track piece. So they are handy to have. And you can
are indeed really helpful. But we also have the 4 stud gap switch now. So not 5, but you can also use.
And there's also a point with no stud gap, isn't there?
Yeah, 0 gap switch.
Yeah, I do quite fancy. I think some of those for a tram in my Lego City might be necessary. I might have to have a play with those. I think another area we we haven't discussed a lot actually is narrow gauge Lego track geometry, because there are some standard Lego parts for sort of a narrow gauge, so 4 studs between the rails rather than the standard 6 studs. And also Trixbrx does provide some narrow gauge. I think, is it the standard is R56 for the narrow gauge track? Because I do have some, but I haven't used it.
Yes, I believe it is the standard.
Yeah, the switches and the narrow crossover and stuff like that is all of them are R36. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we also have R96 is the biggest radius.
Oh wow, I hadn't seen that yet, but I don't have space for it anyway. So
R96 is quite big, but with a narrow layout, you need much less space. So yeah, if you haven't seen it already, go check it out. This narrow crossover is really cute. It's like a mini version of its big brother. It's so cool.
there are some really cool. It's actually quite developed, the narrow gauge system that Trixbrx have, and I was able to get quite a nice track layout for a new layout. I'm still working on, and now it's been moved away into the garage, and I'll never get around to it again, probably.
Yeah, it's just that I would like to take this opportunity to ask the community if they can build a train for it, because we now have these tracks, but we have not seen many narrow gauge trains for it. So I challenge.
There are some very cool designs. The Australian guys behind the VRLGM group have a puffing Billy layout on. They actually built a narrow gauge system from old single 12-volt rails with working points as well, which is really impressive. And those guys have a sort of drivetrain system which works quite well. And our member Jamie is also working on one which works, I think, most of the time. But as Jamie does, he likes to take things apart once they work and then rebuild them again and again. So there are some systems, but I think you're right there, Marine, in that there don't seem to be a lot of solutions yet for powering the narrow gauge.
That is the big problem, the tight space and the big motors involved.
Yeah, they are. The Lego motors themselves are quite clunky.
Indeed, but I'm sure it can be done, and I think we need more locomotives. So hereby, I challenge the community to get us more.
That's a good challenge. I hope a couple more people take that up.
The one question I'd have is, are we going to see a turnout between the standard R40 and the R104 turnouts we've seen?
You mean if you can connect them together, or?
No, like something like an R. I think there was somebody throwing about the idea of an R68 turnout because it would be good for a yard ladder, but
for narrow gauge, you mean, or
no, for standard gauge?
I will definitely add that to the list if it isn't on there already. But we still have a lot of products to produce still in the R40 radius. And we are also looking into switches in bigger radius. So we just released the ballasting plates for switches. We now have the R40 switch ballast plates for Lego switches. And more R40 stuff will come.
So we have discussed Trixbrx and BrickTracks quite a bit, but there are some other manufacturers, and I think a worthwhile one to discuss, which Scott's agreed to chat about for us, is OK Brickworks.
Yeah, so OK Brickworks is a kind of a division, almost, if you will, of the Brick Train Depot guys, and they do a lot of the they'll do sort of like the custom track pieces, if you will. So somebody had requested recently, I remember, something like I don't know why they wanted like an R32 regular curve for whatever reason. And so, that's something like that. We're not going to develop, we're certainly not going to develop molds for something like that. So we've worked with OK Brickworks on something like that, where special requests could still be made and done almost on demand. And they are doing some work on some other things. And for instance, Matt, you had mentioned looking at like a kind of a mid-range switch. They have one that they are testing out, and we'll probably see here sometime soon.
Great, thanks, Scott. Do we have anything else to discuss or to add?
I would like to point out still something.
Sure.
I guess it's kind of already been said in the last episode, but maybe we can add it also to this episode as well. That is that only since these third-party manufacturers started offering a wider range of tracks, it's actually for the first time that we Lego train builders can build a layout like our fellow builders in the scale model train business. And I think that is something that is really cool, and that is something that I'm just very happy with, because we waited for years for Lego to produce these tracks and take the AFOL community seriously. And Lego obviously doesn't see any market in the AFOL train business. So I am just very happy that we now have all these tracks to create all these wonderful layouts with. And I would just want to point out that, yeah, everything is awesome.
That's going to be stuck in my head for quite a long time now. Thanks, thanks, Marie.
Yeah, I think we needed some more, a positive vibe. Not that it was negative or something, but yeah, I think sometimes we are so deep into this stuff that we forget that it's such a revolution the whole community has gone through.
I think a version of the website that I made, or the webpage that I made, that addresses all the different radius of track would probably be more of a book than a single webpage. So there's certainly a lot of information to explore with all the different possibilities from the various different providers.
Yeah, but don't forget, Bill, that it was your work we are continuing on, because one of the attendants here also said, he was looking at it when he was a kid, and that is also my story. We have all been on your website once.
That's very very touching to hear. Thank you so much for that, and I'm glad I was able to help.
I also really looked at it again when I was building this example layouts website, so it was really helpful with getting the basics right.
I should probably do it over with Bluebrick. It was originally done with Track Designer, which is an obsolete program that was only available for Windows and for which the source code has been lost, and so there's no way to update it. So
I think that when you will update it with all these new geometries, you will have a daytime job on it.
I think I'm going to stick to the Lego official parts just because I that's where I build, so I don't really feel I have the expertise to build the expanded version. But I would be happy to link to any of you if you put together a website that does have more information about the other radii.
That would be wonderful. Of course, the website examplelayouts.com holds a lot of information about the geometry, and the publisher, the creator of the Trixbrx Bluebrick library, Matthias Runte, also has a website, matzobricks.com, and he also explains a lot of stuff about geometry as well.
Yeah, send me the links to those, and I'll link to them from my brickpile.com website, and I will also be posting a blog entry when this podcast episode goes live, linking to the podcast recording as well as those other links that we talk about.
Okay, well, I think that's about all we've got. So thanks, guys, for contributing so much. I think that's going to be a really good episode, hopefully. So I will ping you a link once it's been edited and up, and hopefully you can join us again if we've got another relevant topic. I'm sure we can fit you in somewhere.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Great. Okay, I think that is about all for this episode of the LNUR Line. Just a quick thanks to our members involved. So Matt, the producer, who's going to be editing this, and to Will and Henry, who's also chipped in. And also special thanks to our guests. So Scott,
Bye.
Bill,
Goodbye.
and Marie.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a great day.
So thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.